Morning, Brother Brian.
Good afternoon, Chris.
How are you?
Good,
We got that backwards, but that's all right.
Good.
So sorry for your loss, you and Hadi. I've been seeing
70 million other people.
Oh,
Yeah, thank you.
I'm sure.
But we have a whole new king now, so things carry on.
Haven't had one in a long time. It amazed me when I look back and think about what the world was like when the queen became the queen.
Yeah.
And how much, I think if one person, how much has the world changed in your lifetime? I think she may get the record for seeing the most change.
Yep.
You know, anybody born from that era, but still going into the 21st century and all the changes we're starting to see. It's amazing. The world's a completely different place, it seems, but she was queen a third as long as my country has existed. That's pretty wild.
And she was queen of 57 countries at one stage.
Yeah.
Now she's queen of about, I think it's 27.
Right.
But still head of the Commonwealth, which is another 50 odd countries.
Right. Yeah. I'm sure that's going to dominate the news cycle here for the next couple of years.
On the plus side, we get a holiday because for a funeral.
Oh, well, there's that. Yes. And I asked a question online. I think someone gave me an answer. King Charles was 73 as he's ascending the throne. And that is the oldest monarch in British history to assume office at that age. And I was asking, well, how about in other countries? And it turns out, like in Saudi Arabia, one king was like 91, and the guy before him was like 89 or something, or vice versa. So it's still pretty old. I mean, we elect presidents in their 70s, but typically they've been in public service their whole lives, so it's not unusual to get a guy who's running for president in his 60s or 70s. But, you know, to be king at 73, I don't know.
Yeah. Again, though, he's been in public service all his life as well.
Yeah. Well, this is true. This is true. I mean, the job was hidden. It was his when he was born. I mean, it's not like he's just sort of waiting around. But it'd be interesting to see what he does and how much things change.
But I think the big difference is that your 70-odd-year-old has got great power to sort of just change things and blow up the world. Our 70-year-old hasn't. Right.
It's an interesting position. I mean, it's a figurehead, but they still have some power. They have a great deal of influence, certainly.
Yeah, it's more influence. I guess you call it soft power rather than actually.
Yes, using the bully pulpit and what all.
Yeah.
I keep saying that our presidents need to do is use the bully pulpit more and pushing to pass laws less. I mean, change public opinion with your words, not just pass another law. So, morning, Brother Carlos. Good to have you here.
Good morning, Brother.
Good morning.
Brother Chris.
Good to have you with us. Morning, Brother Kurt. Another regular.
Chris.
Good to have you here. And Brother Michael, nice to have you with us.
Good morning, brother. Good morning, brothers.
Where are you coming from, Michael?
I'm at a Hiram 23 at 2nd District in the state of New York.
New York.
Yes.
All right. Brother Clark, good to have you with us. I'm going to bet he's on the road. Let's see. How you doing? Oh, you're in Mount Rushmore again. You spend a lot of time.
Welcome back, Chris.
Good to have you with us. All right. Well, this should be a really good talk. I've been looking forward to Joe coming here. We've been trying to get Joe here for a time. He did speak earlier this year in person at my lodge, and I unfortunately had to miss it. But I've been trying to get him here as a speaker on our Zoom for a while, so it's good to have him here. So coming up on 10, if some more people come in, we'll do the formal welcome everyone. But nice to see you all here.
I turned my camera off because I'm scarfing down breakfast. So
that's quite all right. You do that. You get ready. So got myself a new coffee mug. Oh, that's cool. Look, there we go. It disappears. There. One of my company mugs that I used for years suddenly started dripping. I set on my coaster. It's like, oh, I spilled coffee. And then I cleaned it up, put it back down. It spilled again. I was like, what's going on? So I took it to the kitchen, put it on a paper towel, filled it with water, and came back and like the paper towel was soaked. So it's like, yep, you're leaking. I never had a coffee cup leak. I mean, I don't know what happened, but somehow it leaked. So I was able to treat myself to a new cup. I'm wearing new glasses, by the way. I went to the eye doctor. They have this new thing called computer lenses, which are like progressive bifocals, but they're more in the middle and bigger and higher up. So they're designed for computer screens. So I can actually see my computer. Everything's actually crisp and clear for the first in a while, but I can't drive in them. So I basically keep them at my desk. So everybody who sees me on Zoom gets to see me in them, but I'm not going to wear them out in public. So, but I wear them in public here. So anyway, but I really like them, and they definitely make a difference. I can actually see my screen clearly. I don't have to blow up everything and zoom in to see it. So I'm very happy with that. So that's what's going on with me. Alan, anything new going on with you? As I ask while you're eating. All right, Kurt, what's going on with you, man? Anything?
Not too much. Wearing my red for the Badger game today, but that's about
okay. Would that be a sport? I wouldn't know. I'm not into Pokemon.
We're not into what?
I'm not into Pokemon. That's my standard response.
Pokemon. Oh no, I'm
Yes,
talking about we're talking football.
I know. And anytime somebody mentions that's a line from a comic that I read called XKCD.
Okay.
Anytime someone says anything about any kind of sporting event or any kind of TV, anything it is, you just say, I wouldn't know. I'm not into Pokemon. That's just my standard response.
I may have to steal that line.
People are like, it's not Pokemon, it's football, damn it. It's like joke. It's like I know you're talking, football. That's with the baskets, and you get the home runs and all that, and yes. Know all about sport. How about that local sports team? Morning, brother Kyle. Oh, we got more people go. All right, wait a minute. It's funny how they come in floods. Interesting thing about Zoom is you have no idea how many people are coming in, and it's just sort of like you see them. I made you co-host, Brian, by the way. You just sort of see people pop up. So you have no way of knowing. There's no advance notice. So like it just, there's someone, and you add them. There's no way to anticipate they're coming in, but they do seem to come in groups. I don't know why that is. Like Kyle and Brother Reed just came in at the same time, basically. I don't know how. There, see, and Adoniram is here. Morning, Brother Reed. Nice to have you with us.
Good morning.
Brother Adoniram dressed up. We appreciate that. Good morning, Brother Adoniram. Where do you hail from?
Good morning. I'm sorry. I that was from another meeting. I changed the name. It's actually Javier Ramirez from New York.
Oh, good. Good to have you with us. Well, I love your profile pic. That looks good.
It's pseudo Solomon.
Oh, okay.
But it's actually Artaxerxes from a movie called A Night with the King, based on the story of Book of Esther.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Make sure my son lets the dog out before he keeps running. All right. Good morning, everyone. This is Virginia Research Lodge's semi-weekly unstated Zoom meeting. I appreciate you all coming out. If you look in the chat, I have a few links for everyone. If you're not already a member of our Facebook group, the first link is to our Facebook group. The second one is to our website. The third is to our YouTube channel where we post these meetings. And if you are watching us on YouTube sometime in the future, please like and subscribe. And finally is my email address if you want to reach out to me. We have Virginia Research Lodge publishes our research papers going back to 1950. And we publish them every week in our Spreading the Light series. You can get those in a weekly email by contacting me on Facebook or email. And we also post them on our website and on our Facebook group, as well as other interesting things. So please join us. And like I said, if you're watching us on YouTube, then like and subscribe. We need the support. Brother Chad, Brother Jason, good to have you all with us.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you. Hello. Good morning.
Good. Hey, there you are. And where are you from, Chad?
I am in little Appalachian, Ohio, small little corner of the state.
All right, good.
It's a
Wow.
member of the High Lodge of Research, current president of the Midwest Conference on Masonic Education. And honestly, I was just kind of traveling through, and I know Brother Martinez, and I know how great the speaker he is. And so
Good.
I figured I would try to get here anonymously, but that did not work this morning.
All right.
So that's outstanding. It's an honor to be here. So
We appreciate you being here. We do. And Brother Jason, Brother Patrick, nice to have you all here as well. If you want to pop in and say hello. We've got a decent crowd coming in. These things have kind of been, for those of you who have been here regularly, it's like, it seems we have some weeks where we have, 20 or 30 people, and it's really good. And some weeks when we're lucky to get 10 or 12. So I'm always happy to see a good crowd. Areas, Brother Kyle, nice to see you.
Hey, good morning, brothers. I'm from Greensboro, 76, out of Greensboro, North Carolina.
North Carolina, very good. I was just reading a paper about the brother, I'm going to have to cheat and look it up, about the brother who was responsible for all of the Masonic bodies in North Carolina. Let me look. J. Raymond Shute Jr. You heard of him, Kyle?
I haven't.
Okay. He founded, he brought a number of research bodies to North Carolina, like the Allied Masonic Degrees and the Knight Masons, and he was instrumental in chartering North Carolina Lodge Research number 666, which unfortunately has disappeared. But back in the 1920s and 30s, he started a whole bunch of charters for research bodies, and more of our many smaller side degrees in Masonry. He started a lot of them down in North Carolina. So
Wow.
he was personally invited. That's one of the papers that'll be coming up, I guess, in a couple weeks.
So it's his fault that there's all these dues cards in people's wallets. Is that what you're saying?
In North Carolina, yes.
Yes.
I've run around this game since like the 80s and 90s, but for most of you all of these things you just assume have always been there. There's always been a Scottish Rite. There's always been New York Royal Arch chapter. There's always been Allied Masonic degrees and all that. But someone had to go to the trouble of saying, okay, here's this new Allied Masonic degrees. Let's go and bring it to North Carolina or Virginia or what have you. So people have to put in a lot of work to charter those in each state. And sometimes they catch on and they grow, and there's a bunch of them. And sometimes there's only like one in a state, and that's it. So it's interesting. It's just interesting in North Carolina, at least I can trace it down to basically two people who are responsible for spreading that so much across the state. So
Wow.
I think that's pretty cool.
I've
Yeah,
spread knowledge.
Yes. Well, hello, Monica. Welcome you joining us. And hello, Anachetsky. Nice to be with us. I assume that's the last name. Ooh, we got a lot of people coming in. This is good. More and more people coming in. So we'll continue to vamp for a few minutes as more people continue to stream in. Like I was saying a few minutes ago, people come in. I don't know how this works with Zoom, but it seems like you don't generally get one person. You get like 4 or 5 people coming in all at the same time. I can't even explain how that works. Andrew Nichetsky, good to have you here. You can say hello. You don't have to put it in the chat. You're welcome to just put things in the chat if you all like, as long as you're nice, Joe. But
You didn't say we had to be nice.
no, I'm sorry. Okay, well, okay. Maybe if you put it, well, maybe half the people don't look at the chat, so maybe that you can get away with it. But anybody can scroll back and look at it. Yeah, it's to understand the medium. When this goes on YouTube, anything I put in the chat or you put in the chat, nobody's going to see. This doesn't. I make a transcript. Sometimes I put it online if people had like URLs and stuff. I make a point of capturing the links and put them online, but most of the chat, it's like it just, it's there if you made a point of joining the meeting. If you're watching on YouTube, you don't know what we're talking about. But I do ask if you have a question for the speaker, then actually, pop up and ask it. Don't put it in the chat because I don't always read the chat while I'm hosting, so I may miss it. And I'd rather have you say your question out loud if you don't mind. But I will try if you have a question, and if I see it, we'll share it. But I'd like you to pop up and say it. So welcome again, everybody. Those came in a few minutes ago. We had several people join after we did our official opener, but this is Virginia Research Lodge. This is our unstated meeting. The tradition goes back to the heights of COVID back in 2020. We couldn't have our August stated, so we ended up having a Zoom meeting with all the members in place of our meeting. And since we couldn't open, I said, well, it's an unstated meeting. So that became my running joke. And I've been carrying that joke for 2 years and it still works. So I'm still going to use it. But it's become a thing on its own. I generally host this every 2 weeks or so. I occasionally get good speakers. I can't say I did that this week, but I do my best. But I'm very grateful to have Joe Martinez here. He makes me look like an amateur at this research stuff, which is okay because I'm an amateur. I'm not getting paid. So now Joe definitely gets to travel and give a lot of talks, and we're happy to have him here. So, all right. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Joe and let him give how much of his bio he wants to. I figure that's always easier. But...
Please, not a lot.
Okay. Well, this is Joe, and he's happy to be our speaker today. I appreciate everyone coming up, and I'm just going to mute you if you're not already. I think everybody's already muted. So go ahead, take it away, Brother Martinez.
All righty. Let me see if I can share my screen. And
oh yeah, wait,
let me turn that on. So while you're doing that,
I always forget.
No worries. I can
it's all or nothing. It's funny. I can't say just that guy. It's all or nothing. So there you go.
Yep. Let me see what we got here. Okay. So before we get started, since you brought up Greensboro, I figured I would do a little plug. I've been posting about it on Facebook a little bit and sharing. I shared it in Virginia Research Lodge Facebook group. Let me share my screen here and talk about something that's happening in Greensboro in the next few weeks. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Alrighty. So for those in Virginia, Maryland, DC, North Carolina, South Carolina, or anywhere, and you like to travel, North Carolina is having a Masonicon. It's called Masonicon South. Y'all, to distinguish them from the other Masonicons that don't say the word y'all. And we're going to have, I'm not hosting it. It's not my event. It's being hosted by Brother Matt Parker, who I think has been here quite a few times on your unstated meetings. It's going to be a fun day. We're going to have Most Worshipful Brother Sean Bradshaw, past Grand Master North Carolina. His presentations are phenomenal. Some other guys that you know, myself, John Ruark, Robert Johnson, Jason Richards, P.D. Newman. He's going to be there as well. And then they just announced their keynote speaker, who Virginia Masons will absolutely know. That is illustrious and most worshipful brother Jim Cole. He's going to be the keynote speaker. It's going to be on October 15th at the Greensboro Masonic Temple. And I will, Brother Chris, I'll put a link to the website in the chat so people can look at it. But yeah, tickets are going pretty quick. They're about 3/4 of the way selling tickets. So once they fill up the Masonic Temple in Greensboro, they are not selling tickets anymore. So all day event and then a festive board open to everybody, untiled. So just a little plug there. But if anyone has questions, you can hit me up after the presentation and stuff, and you know where to find me on Facebook and all those places. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to start off by saying that it's very, very difficult to condense 5,000 years of history into a 30 or 35 minute long presentation, but we're going to attempt to do so and melt it all together into one concise package as quickly and concisely as I can. And for starters, I'm sure some of you are wondering, why are we talking about Egyptian things and Osiris at a presentation that's supposed to be Masonic in nature? So I'm going to ruin the surprise for you and tell you that many of the creation myths of many ancient cultures, some that existed before the time of recorded history, or what we call prehistory, and more specifically, the myths surrounding Osiris, are really familiar to those who have never read or heard those stories firsthand. They've just been told to you in different and altered forms. A story of creation, a story of a slain king, and the story of a lost secret has all been repackaged and reinvented across the centuries. And although a little bit different each time, it really has the same markers in each retelling or recounting that make it easy to see that these stories span things like the borders of nations and the divisions of time and space throughout all of recorded history. So let's take a brief second before we start to talk about how we're going to use the term mythology in this presentation. So the term mythology really has a negative connotation in the modern sense of the word. People nowadays like to use this word to describe magical and fanciful tales of the past that don't have any historical or cultural lasting significance. And that's just flat out untrue. That's, unfortunately, I'm not a big conspiracy theorist guy, but modern media has kind of presented that, and modern education has presented it in a way that has a negative connotation. The word mythology, when used by scholars, is used as it's originally intended, and it's taken from the Greek word mythos, which literally means story of the people. That's all it means. And its definition, I have to read it for you, is a study and interpretation of often sacred tales or stories of a culture known as myths, or a collection of such stories which deal with various aspects of the human condition. So it's a collection of stories, both oral and written, especially ones belonging to a particular religious or cultural tradition. So the word mythology can be used to discuss the stories of the Jewish tradition or the Christian religion or the Islamic tradition or any other religious system. It doesn't have to have that inherent negative or make-believe connotation. So when you're using it in a scholarly sense, that is the correct definition. So what we're going to talk about today is a brief history of the Egyptian mythos, the different places it came from, the story surrounding the creation of the world, perhaps how it's similar to some other stories that you've heard in the past, the story of the first God-King Osiris and his transmission of knowledge and science to the world, his life, his death, his rebirth. Again, we'll touch on how this story influences many tales that came later, what that means, and how they should resonate at least a little bit with the modern Freemason. And I hope that you'll find at least a tiny nugget of something interesting in the next 25 minutes. So, to begin with ancient Egyptian history, we have to look at the pre- and proto-dynastic period. So that's from about 10,000 to about 4,000 BCE. And then the rise of the different major city centers in ancient Egypt. So the proto-dynastic period was marked by these really big impacts to human civilization. The first hieroglyphs, the first use of stone palettes for communicating, the regular use of serex or early cartouches that you're familiar with, the first royal cemeteries, and then the invention of advanced sail navigation that started in proto-dynastic Egypt. So from this transmission of written language, we find out about these numerous creation myths, and most notably the different myths surrounding Osiris, which arose in a few different places across the kingdom of Egypt. So you have to understand that the overall construct that we understand today as the ancient Egyptian religion really arose a bit differently across the various major city centers throughout that civilization. It didn't just sprout in one place and was transmitted. It sprouted differently depending on who was in charge and what city ruled Egypt at the time. So depending on which family reigned, which gods were given more importance or credence at that time, and even which area held more political, and by political I mean priestly power, there were these major city centers that contributed to the mythos of Osiris. So these major city centers these are their original names, Iunu, which means pillars, Inebu-Hadesh, which means the white walls. We have Wasit, or the city of the scepter, and then we have Kamenu, meaning 8 town, the number 8. So there were different stories of creation and the birth of the Egyptian dynasty that all rose from these different cities, and they do have some major commonalities, but they were later merged into a more or less unified religious story by the second intermediate and New Kingdom period. So going back to here, we're talking about right around the 1600s, 1500s. Old Testament scholars will find that interesting because that time frame seems to align with when the Jews were in Egypt. And I just have to note that with the rise of the Ptolemaic dynasties, those were the Greeks who actually came to rule Egypt. Those original Egyptian religious ideas really started to get merged with Greek culture and religion and really watered down the rest of the Egyptian religious history for that time period. So let's start with Iunu, and you may know it as Heliopolis. And Heliopolis was the Latinized form of the Greek name Heliopolis, which meant city of the sun. So Helios was the personified and deified form of the sun, and was identified with by the Greeks with the Egyptian gods Ra and Atum. And their principal cult was located in that city. The city also appears in the Old Kingdom pyramid texts, which we'll talk about, as the House of Ra. Next, we have Nebuchadnezzar, or Memphis, had several names throughout its long history of almost 4,000 years. And its ancient Egyptian name, Nebuchadnezzar, meant the white walls, because it had white walls at its border in olden times. Memphis was the capital of ancient Egypt for over 8 dynasties throughout the Old Kingdom, and the city reached its peak under the 6th dynasty as the center for the worship of the god Ptah, or the god of creation. And he was later replaced by the Ogdoad that's found in Egyptian myth narratives, and we're going to talk about them in a bit. Ancient sources suggest that the White Walls were founded by Menes, the first king of unified Egypt, so he unified Lower and Upper Egypt. They were not known as Pharaoh yet, okay? Pharaoh was a Greek word that really wasn't used until the New Kingdom time periods. So it's very likely that Menes, the first king of a unified Egypt, established himself there to basically control this new union between two kingdoms that were rivals with each other. Next, we have Waset, and the Egyptian name for Thebes was Waset, or City of the Scepter of the Kings. Thebes was always a major city center for ancient Egypt, and it contained popular things like the Temple of Luxor, and that was the traditional temple for king-making. And it was the capital of the Egyptian kingdom for many, many centuries on and off. And then finally, we have Kemenu. The Greek name is Hermopolis, and it was the Egyptian language name of the city, and it means town of 8, or 8 town. It was named after the Ogdoad, and it was a group of 8 primordial deities whose cult was situated there for centuries. The city was later named the City of Hermes, since the Greeks identified Hermes with Thoth, and the city was the main cult center of Thoth. He was the Egyptian god of magic, healing, wisdom, and he was the patron of scribes. And we love scribes because they write things down for us to read. So what the Ogdoad are and what they signify is really a good segue into the ancient Egyptian creation narrative. So one of the most popular Egyptian creation myths, the myths coming from Hermopolis, start with the story of the Ogdoad.
Brother Joe, I got a question.
Yeah.
So Heliopolis was the Greek name for the city of On, correct? Well, would they say On?
I honestly don't know how they would have said it, on or own.
Right. So like, there's been, like word etymology, would say that like, that's why we still say on, like a light switch is on to this day, because it was the city of the sun. And it kind of relates to Solomon, Greek soul, the priest of Om, and then the city of On, all relating to the sun. Have you ever heard that connection?
Well, the word soul is, not to get off on a tangent, but the word soul is Latin. It's not Greek. The Greek word for sun is Helios. So, yeah, I've heard the etymology of the Sol, on kind of thing, which we don't talk about too much in this talk, because that starts to get into early Judaic, almost Kabbalistic conversations. You know what I mean? But yeah, to your point, yeah. So Heliopolis, also known as On, yeah, that's another name for it. Absolutely. But yeah, like I said, we don't get into the Sol On conversation, but maybe we can after the presentation.
I guess the other part of my question is, do you know if Heliopolis or On encompasses modern day Cairo? Because they say that the Great Pyramid was the temple of the sun.
I've not seen that in my research. So we know where the Great Pyramid is. Heliopolis is a suburb outside of Cairo in the modern sense. It was merged with Cairo, absolutely. And then, talking about the conjecture of its purpose, whether it was a temple or whether it was actually a funerary monument. That's definitely outside of the scope of today's talk. But yeah, no, absolutely. It's Heliopolis was absolutely a part of modern day Cairo.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, brother.
Yep. Where were we? Oh, we're gonna talk about some old dudes, the Ogdoad. Okay, so the Ogdoad were the basically the primordial deities or the celestial rulers of the cosmic age before we have the age of Earth. They had come long before the Egyptian religious system that we currently recognize and study. And the Ogdoad were concerned with the preservation of things in the celestial world, and later, as we'll see, the formation of the human race. So, though their power among the Egyptian people was most widely recognized in the Old Kingdom time period, so we're like 2600 to 2100 BCE, there are traces of this pantheon that made its way down to the next set of gods, the ancient Egyptian gods. So they were kind of similar to the Titans in Greek mythology. So this Ogdoad predates the more commonly known Egyptian gods such as Osiris and Isis, Anubis, and so on. They were considered to have come into creation before the world did. And they consisted of 4 couples, or 8 deities who balanced one another out, and basically had a balance in nature. So each pair correlated with one of the primordial forces of creation in the Egyptian belief system, things like water, air, light, and time. So there were 3 primary pairs, Nu, Nanuet, Hehu, Hehut, Kekui, Kekuit, and they always had the same names. The 4th pair sometimes had different variations, and were also known as Amun and Amunet. In the Old Kingdom of ancient Egypt, it was believed that Nu and Nanuet were responsible for the development of the primordial waters of the universe. And primordial water sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it? So Amun and Amunet were the caretakers of air, while Kekui and Kekuet were the keepers of the darkness. And then finally, Hehu and Hehut were responsible for maintaining these really big things called eternity and infinity. So each first name in these pairings are the male avatar, while the second is the female, and really created an equal balance of genders in the early pantheon. So the Egyptians, without knowing it, they were hyper progressive in their religion. There were several views from the Egyptians that emanated from the time of worship of the Ogdoad, such as how the world came to be. The most popular was that the Ogdoad created an egg in the primordial waters from which the world was born. It was considered to be invisible, obviously, because before creation there was no light, until the day that this cosmic egg hatched and out came the brilliant golden light of the newly born sun. This form of the sun was called Ra, one of the only Egyptian deities to have been accepted by both the old followers of the Ogdoad religion and the later religious systems that we've heard of. So Ra, also known as Atum, was really that common point between these 2 religious systems. So we have these pre-existence deities, and it's at this point in the story, most of the popular myths converge with the story of the actual creation of the world and mankind. So for the rest of this story, we're going to focus on the most popular meldings of these characters. So Ra, Atum, Amun, all became interchangeable depending on when and where you lived in the Egyptian kingdom. So now we come to the story of creation of the world and man. And we're going to use the Ra version of this story, or Atum. So, let me lower that, that's loud. So, once upon a time, before there was land, fish, land animals, human life, there was this great expansion of primordial waters that encompassed the entirety of the universe. Nothing existed in these primordial waters since the beginning of time, until this great egg appeared in the water. This cosmic egg that we know contained Ra, or Atum, which represented the daytime sun. Okay, so light was first created. Once his egg hatched, he burst forth into the universe and took his place as its great ruler. So in other narratives, this journey began with the creation of the world and the universe out of darkness and swirling chaos. Where else have we heard that? Once there was nothing but endless dark water without form or purpose, or a formless void. Again, that should sound familiar. Existing within this void was someone known as Heka, or the god of magic, who awaited the moment of creation. So out of this watery silence, also known as Nu, arose this primordial hill that they called the Ben, and on top of which stood the great god Atum, or in other versions of the myth, Ra. So Atum looked upon the nothingness and recognized that he was alone, and through magic, got to suspend your disbelief for a little bit, mated with his own shadow, and he gave birth to 2 children. Okay, so that's him loving himself. He gave birth to 2 children, Shu, the god of air, whom Atum spat out, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture, whom Atum vomited out. And there are other versions of the story, excuse me, before someone corrects me, that some versions of the myth say that Atum loved himself a lot and forced him out in that way. And we'll leave it at that. So Shu gave birth to the early world, while Tefnut contributed to the order that was in that world. So this order, which you may have heard of, would come to be known as Ma'at, which came this overarching theme of Egyptian kingdom society. So Ma'at represents the ethical and the moral principle that every Egyptian citizen was expected to follow throughout their daily lives. They were expected to act with honor and being truthful in matters that involve their family, their community, their nation, the environment, and even the gods. So the significance of Ma'at developed to the point that it embraced really all aspects of Egyptian existence. You really did not find another culture in history that had this overarching principle that governed their entire lives. And it also talked about different aspects of existence, including the order found in the universe, the cycle of the seasons, the movements of the stars, religious observations, and again, being honest and truthful in your interactions with others. So Ma'at really pervaded every aspect of Egyptian culture for thousands and thousands of years. So it was not a fleeting thing. So back to Shu and Tefnut. So they left their father on the Benben and they went out to create the world. So in time, Atum became worried because his children were gone for such a long time. So he removed his eyeball, as any good father would do, and he sent his eyeball out in search for them. So while his eye was gone, Atum sat alone on the hill in the midst of chaos and basically contemplated eternity. And Shu and Tefnut finally returned with the Eye of Atum, which is later associated with the Eye of Ra, or the all-seeing eye. And their father, so happy for their return, shed tears of joy. And these tears dropped onto the dark, fertile earth of the Benben, and these tears gave birth to you and me, men and women. So now these human beings had nowhere to live. So Shu and Tefnut basically mated and gave birth to Geb, the earth, and Nut, the sky. Geb and Nut, though brother and sister, felt deeply in love with and were inseparable with one another. But Atum wasn't cool with this. He found their behavior unacceptable and actually pushed Nut away from Geb. You may have seen something like this before. And pushed Nut away from Geb high up into the heavens. So these two starstruck lovers were forever able to see each other, but were no longer able to touch one another. Oh, let me go back to this slide. Some versions of the legend will say that Nut, the goddess of the sky, formed a starry deck canopy over her husband, the earth. And this should also sound familiar to the earth and the heavens being separated in other creation narratives. But before they were separated, with this, forbidden love that they had, Geb and Nut conceived and had 4 children. So they had 2 sons and 2 daughters, and the sons were Set and Osiris, and their daughters were Isis and Nephthys. Like their parents and their aunt and uncle, they fell in love too. Osiris and Isis fell in love, and Set and Nephthys fell in love. So it's in the pyramid texts of the pyramids of Teti in Saqqara where we pick up the most comprehensive narrative of the Osirian myth. So after their grandfather Ra passes on, Osiris was called upon by Ra to act as ruler of the universe. So he was the god of the good things, right? The god of fertility, of agriculture, of vegetation. He was the god of life. And as soon as we'll see in a little bit, he becomes the god of the afterlife and rebirth in the ancient Egyptian religion. So after his coronation as ruler of the universe, he traveled the world and brought science and agriculture and language to all corners of the globe. As with other religions with initiatory rites, this transmission of divine knowledge was done so by Osiris, and he was credited with bringing civilization to the human beings that his grandfather created. He married his sister Isis, who became queen of the universe and his consort. Now Set was the brother of Osiris, and he was the god of not awesome things. He was the god of deserts, of storms, of fire, of war, of envy, of disorder, and so on. And as you can imagine, Set and Osiris didn't get along. Especially after Osiris was chosen to succeed his father Ra. Set did not like his brother becoming master of all creation and felt that he should be ruler instead of his brother. And his anger was really fueled further when Osiris departed to spread light, knowledge, and science throughout the world. He made his sister wife Isis ruler of Egypt while he was gone instead of bestowing his power to his brother Set. So Set's got a lot of reasons to be pissed off, essentially. So Set had a terrible temper, and he vowed to kill his brother and take the power that he considered to be rightfully his. When Osiris returned to Egypt, Set had a plot to destroy his brother. And one night while he slept, he had a beautiful cedar wood and ebony chest made just for the occasion. And he took measurements of Osiris while he slept one night after he returned. So then he announces a banquet. He said, hey, let's have a banquet to honor Osiris's return. And he took out this beautiful cedar wood and ebony chest that he made just for this occasion and invited all the gods to this party. So they feasted and partied as gods do. And at the celebration, he took out the beautiful chest and he offered the chest to anyone who could fit into it. So just as Set had planned, none of the other guests fit in the chest perfectly. They were too tall, too short, too fat, too skinny. The only person that was able to fit into it was Osiris. So when Osiris lay down in the chest, which had been made to fit him and only him, Set and his followers slammed on the lid and nailed it down. And then they sealed it by pouring molten lead in all the cavities and threw the whole chest into the Nile River. So this obviously hurt Isis, who really couldn't bear to be without her beloved Osiris. And Isis's grief was so great that her sister and Set's wife, Nephthys, helped Isis to search for the king. And while they were out searching, Set took over as the ruler of all of Egypt and all the lands in creation. And he started to neglect the gifts that Osiris and Isis had given to the people. And the land started to suffer drought and famine and war. The chest was swept out to sea and landed on a coast near Byblos. Oh, where is it? There it is. The instant that it touched the land near Byblos, a huge tamarisk tree sprouted up to protect it. This tree grew so large that the king of Byblos cut the tree down and fashioned it into a pillar in his palace. Isis tracked his body to Byblos and persuaded the king to give it to her. Notably, this pillar that contained Osiris was also known as the Jed Pillar, which symbolized the spine of Osiris. And here you see with a crook and a flail that you may have seen in hieroglyphics. So she took her husband's corpse back to Egypt and made a call to Anubis to prepare the body for the first ever mummification. And while they left the body unattended, Set was angry that they found the body, stole the body of Osiris, and he became so angry that he dismembered the body into sometimes 14 and in other times 42 different pieces and scattered the body parts throughout Egypt. Now Isis was more distraught, and she again enlisted the help of her sister Nephthys, and they found all but one of the pieces. This missing piece, as many of you know and laughed about in high school, was his phallus. And it was apparently swallowed by a fish that was loyal to Set. So Isis and Nephthys mourned over the dead body of their brother and husband, and Ra took pity on them. So he sent Anubis to prepare Osiris for that mummification, first ever, and he instructed Thoth and Isis and Nephthys to piece the body back together. So here, Isis transformed into a small bird and breathed life into him, but it wasn't sufficient for him to take his place with the living. But it was just enough to give his body life enough for her to conceive a son through their union with Osiris. So this child was born and was hidden from Set and was named Horus. Osiris revived, but could no longer rule among the land of the living because he was no longer whole. He was missing his phallus. But Ra allowed him to descend into the underworld and reign there as the Lord of the Dead, as like a parting gift to him. Osiris left for the underworld, and Isis went into hiding in the delta regions of Egypt to protect herself and her son from Set. So Isis gave birth to Horus alone in the swamps of the delta. She hid herself and her son in the thickets and the reeds, and only going out at night for food. And some of the other gods helped her out as she was raising her son. So Isis and some of the other pantheon of gods nurtured Horus and raised him and educated him while they were in exile until he was grown into manhood and was strong enough to challenge his uncle for his father's kingdom. So once Horus grew to adulthood, he returned and confronted the Egyptian pantheon about who he was, his heritage, and challenged his uncle for the right to reclaim the throne. Sometimes his contest involved a challenge of wits or the mind with puzzles to solve. And in others, it involved Horus slaying Set and losing an eye, which would later become the very famous Eye of Horus. And in others still, Horus would defeat Set, not slay him, And Set would find redemption by sailing on the sun barge with his father Ra to fight the serpent Apophis every night, who tried to devour the sun. So Horus, now having conquered Set and restoring order, Horus became known as the uniter of the two lands, the lower and the upper kingdom of Egypt. He reinstated the policies of his parents, rejuvenated the land, and ruled wisely. So it's for this reason that the kings of Egypt, the first dynasty, aligned themselves with Horus. And, oh, excuse me for a second. I'm so sorry.
Joe will be back in a minute. He has to let his dog out. Please stay tuned. When I publish this on YouTube, I'll make sure I cut out this section.
Yes, cut that out. I'm so sorry. My 10-year-old next door neighbor asked if she could get her basketball from our fence. So, my bad. Alrighty, so let me go back a second so Chris can edit it. So, again, Horus became the uniter of these two lands, the lower and the upper kingdoms of Egypt. He reinstated all the amazing things that Osiris had done. And future kings started to align themselves with Horus and would choose a Horus name or a king name to rule at their coronation and their initiation ceremony. Osiris had been the first king of Egypt to establish order and then passed on to the underworld, while Horus was the king that restored that order after it was overturned by Set, who raised Egypt up from chaos to harmony. Egyptian kings therefore identified themselves with Horus in life and Osiris in death. So during their reign, they were the physical manifestation of Horus, and at the moment of their death, during their burial ceremony, they traveled to the underworld to join with Osiris. Now, back to Osiris. Instead of coming back to life fully, he traveled to the underworld, a dark and a desolate place. But Ra assured him that he would find peace and contentment as the king of the dead, and his son Horus would rule over the living until the time that Ra chose to unmake his creation and return everything to the nothingness from whence it came. So when Egyptian kings passed on, they would travel, after being prepared using the proper rituals, to the land of the dead to sit with Osiris. Similar ritual practices would assist the new king-to-be to transform from a man to a god-man in the form of the new Horus. So there's this dual practice or ritual in the king-making ceremonies. The newly crowned king, who was, and I've said it before, a physical manifestation of Horus on earth, would reign as the Horus. And I say it multiple times because we as modern folk don't understand that. The people in Egypt absolutely believed to the core of their being that when their king went through this process, he became a god. Okay? Kind of similar to how the Romans, when the emperor would be treated as a god, the Egyptians much more so. When after the king or the new king went through this process, he physically became deity, right? Which again is hard for modern folk to understand that, right? But their whole lives were based around this, and this basically gave them their right to rule, right? Their dynastic right of rule. So again, the newly crowned king became Horus and would reign as the Horus. When he died, he would undergo a ritual where he would be prepared for his journey to the underworld. And during this time, which was about 70 days, his heir would undergo the ceremonies that would transform him into the new Horus. And this was the defining moment that established the divine right of rule for the Egyptian dynasties all the way up through the time of the Ptolemaic period. So there were two rituals. There was a ritual at the funeral and a ritual of king-making. So what are some of these themes? So we have this allegory. We have this tragic murder. We have hidden wisdom that's lost and is transmitted. We have multiple burials, one burial and then a second burial. We have a transmission of knowledge. we have rites and rituals, and the search for something lost. Kind of interesting. So Mackey tells us about his thoughts on the ritual mysteries of Egypt and their connection to craft masonry in his 1875 edition of his book, Mackey's Encyclopedia. And I'm going to read it for you. So he writes about Egyptian masonry, he calls it. Egypt has always been considered as the birthplace of the mysteries. It was there that the ceremonies of initiation were first established. It was there that truth, first veiled in allegory, and the dogmas of religion were first imparted under symbolic forms. From Egypt, the land of the tongued globe, the land of science and philosophy, peerless for stately tombs and magnificent temples, the land whose civilization was old and a nation before most other nations rose to power. Since then called an empire, the system of symbols was disseminated through Greece and Rome and other countries of Europe and Asia, giving origin through many intermediate steps to that mysterious association which is now represented by the institution of Freemasonry. A little bit of a stretch, and we'll let Mackey slide a little bit there. But let's navigate through some of these themes that are found in both of these systems, the Egyptian mystery rituals and modern Freemasonry. So the first one we're going to talk about is a trinity of people who play a central part in each story in these allegories. An allegory, as you know, is an expression of truths about our human existence using symbols and figures. So we also have a theme of a tragic murder, if my slide ever shows up. So both of these stories, the story of Osiris and the story of Hiram, involve tragic and sudden murders of extraordinary people that were obviously taken before their time. The antagonists in each of these stories have their own reasons, whether it's envy or greed or spite or even a combination of all of these. There's a lot of symbolism to unpack in both the motives of Set and his accomplices and the three ruffians that we talk about in the Hiramic legend. There's secret mysteries and knowledge. Hidden wisdom is kept by our protagonists in each story. Osiris keeps the secrets of the universe, of science, of enlightened wisdom, only to be passed on through the mysteries to his successors. And Hiram, in the speculative craft, keeps the secrets of a master mason, neither one of them imparting them before their untimely death. Burial and reburial. There's multiple burials in both of these stories. Both of the protagonists, Osiris and Hiram, experience multiple burials. Osiris is buried in the chest, then dismembered, then goes through the first mummification. We have in earlier Masonic documents found in the old charges the reburial and secrets of Noah and his three sons. Some of you are familiar and heard this story. And then we also have the Hiramic legend where Hiram was hastily buried and then reburied according to Masonic custom. So then we have the transmission of knowledge at the point of resurrection. So Osiris, through the magic of Isis, transmits his secret knowledge as well as his seed, which gives rise to his son Horus. There's also initiatic practices for the Hierophants, the priests, as they're prepared to do the work of the gods. In the other story that we're familiar with, Master Masons know at which point in the allegory they receive this secret wisdom, or at least the doorway to the beginning of this wisdom. But initiation rites flourish in both of these stories. For Osiris and Horus, there's that rite where each deceased king merges with Osiris, and the new king to be undergoes the secret initiation of not only king-making, but God-making, or apotheosis. In Freemasonry, the rites of initiation are meant to prepare us for a life not of the mundane, but of the celestial and eternal. So the search for something lost. Both allegories contain a treasure, lost forever, with a substitute at the end, until the real treasure is discovered. In the Osiris myth, according to some folks, that which was lost was the phallus. But the phallus was a representation of an incomplete Osiris. So it has less to do with the actual phallus itself and more that Osiris could not be complete. But what we've lost here, what the actual secret is that divine right of rule and of the God aspects of man, which are reclaimed by Horus and his kingly descendants through initiation. In Freemasonry, we know what is lost and what is substituted in its place, leaving us with what's meant to be a lifelong quest of discovery. But is it really as mundane as a word? Or does that word mean something much more? An allegory within an allegory. So what does it mean for us? It means that there is absolutely some symbolism that we should take from the stories of Egypt and her mysteries when discussing Masonic practices and purposes. Transmission of these practices survived in their own vacuum for thousands of years, then started to permeate Hellenized culture with the coming of Alexander the Great, which then those stories transmitted to Roman culture and was passed in husk corners to all the future initiatic systems throughout the Dark Ages to the Age of Enlightenment. And there's similarities upon similarities that we find that are glossed over in ritual. Oh, lost my place. Over thousands and thousands of years. So why do we care? Why are we talking about this? Why does it matter? It means that there's absolutely some symbolism that we should take from the stories of Egypt when we talk about Freemasonry. So we have a slain hero who takes with him a secret or knowledge to the grave, and then who receives a gift, most notably a virgin. Where have we heard that? Osiris was slain. Isis came along, put his pieces back together, created a makeshift phallus. As his brother said, had someone eat the other one. The phallus here was the means by which that gift of the goddess was transmitted. And that gift gave her the birth of a son, to a virgin, I might add, since Isis didn't have a child before Osiris died. But there are many other stories that are similar. The stories of King Arthur also show that he was defeated and his sword was broken. The Lady of the Lake, virgin, gave him a new one, the famous Excalibur, and he completed that hero's journey as legend tells us. Actually, the symbolism is quite consistent, as the Black Knight also lost his manhood in that tale. Percival, as the new young knight seeking out the Holy Grail, when he visits the castle of the wounded Fisher King. Think about that for a second. He sees a lance and a grail. The lance here is another gift in phallic form, and the list goes on and on. And finally, we come to the story and grave of Hiram, that twice buried son of a widow, who kept a secret close to his heart, which caused his untimely death and set into motion a discovery for that which was lost. Be it a word or a formula or some divine secret entrusted to a select few, Hiram took with him to the grave this secret knowledge in the face of death and was rewarded with a raising and a reburial, which culminated his journey of birth, death, and raising. This raising ceremony completes the monomyth saga for this character and really begins our search for truth and light, things that we refer to as wisdom and enlightenment in Freemasonry. The most striking similarities or connection between these two most famous of Masonic symbols, first committed to print in the early 1800s, show striking similarities between the story of Hiram and the story of Osiris, if you know where to look. So what do we have here? If you ask Albert Pike in Morals and Dogma, he would say, and I quote, "Masonry still retains among its emblems one of a woman weeping over a broken column, holding in her hand a branch of acacia or myrtle or tamarisk." Where have we heard that before? While time, we are told, stands behind her, combing out the ringlets of her hair. We need not repeat this trivial explanation given of this representation of Isis weeping at Byblos over the column torn from the palace of the king that contained the body of Osiris, while Horus, the god of time, combs and pours ambrosia on her hair. Super interesting. So finally, we have the circumstances of rebirth or resurrection. Hiram's hasty grave was opened and he was reburied in a place of honor in full Masonic ceremony. He was raised in a very particular way, using a particular manner or ritual, which is performed to every Mason that goes through the degrees. Coincidentally enough, the body of Osiris is raised on the 7th day after his death, which is very symbolic in most solar myth stories. And he was raised under the constellation sign of Leo, or the lion, which just strike us Freemasons as being really coincidental and familiar. So the myth of Osiris really is about redemption and reintegration about the soul. There's a king with the wisdom of the universe, imparting it onto the world. He's cut down by jealousy and greed at the height of his power, unable to finish his task. Through a mystical ceremony or ritual, he's given new life by Isis, who's able to revive him just long enough to conceive an heir and guarantee her husband's place as the lord of the underworld for all time. Most notably in this is the fact that Isis conceives her son after his death, which again makes Horus the son of a widow, doesn't it? Synesius, the Greek Christian bishop of the early church, points out that there was evidence enough of this elaborate and secretive king-making ritual that an initiation would take a man or a woman and transform them into the personification of Horus on earth. So even the early Christian church understood these rituals and their purpose, even if they didn't get to partake in any of them. Plutarch also notes in his essays on the Egyptians that from the conflict of Osiris and Isis, we're to understand these really big concepts about life, such as dark and light and good and evil. Osiris was really the prototype for order and beauty and harmony, and Set was the prototype of disorder, asymmetry, and disharmony. One of my favorites, Brother Manly Hall, also describes the Egyptian mysteries as containing the ancient allegories that we find within Freemasonry. He notes, and I quote, "The phallus being the symbol of the vital power is so used in Egyptian hieroglyphics. The phallus then to them is the lost word which is not discovered, but for which a golden replica is substituted. This replica produced the divine child Horus, who completes the hero's journey." So he also notes that the great minds of antiquity all made the trek to ancient Egypt, and we hear about that in our ritual, to learn the mysteries and the sciences such as Thales and Solon and Plato, Democritus, Pythagoras, and Plutarch, just to name a few. And this was something that would not have been done by so many if there was little more than mysticism and card tricks to be found there. So finally, Osiris's journey from creation, life, death, and rebirth is the story of atonement or at-one-ment with the divine. That search for light that people still make to this day. A search for the divine in us all and that divinity all around us. And that search begins on a path that was laid before us in man, at least as far back as we know, as the time of Isis and Osiris. And that concludes my presentation. What are your questions?
That was very good, Joe. I really enjoyed that.
Thanks, man. Sorry for the break there.
That's all right. Any questions?
I think I'm gonna have to watch it again just to get questions. There's so much in there. That is amazing.
Go ahead, Chad.
Chad.
Sorry. This may be a question that I'm looking at this more of a theological standpoint than a Masonic standpoint, and I'm so sorry about that. But was, for the average Egyptian, was the idea that apotheosis was possible by anybody or only by somebody with royal blood? That's what I wanted to know.
No, you got to remember so the concept of, and that's why I kind of harped on it, the concept of a divine right to rule was so ingrained in these people. And that's why I said, like, we as modern people, we don't think that, Joe Biden or Donald Trump become a deity, right? When they become rulers, right? But let's look at this from, to your point, from a theological and naturalistic perspective. What's in the Capitol building? We have this, or used to be in the Capitol building. We have this huge statue. What's it called? The Apotheosis of Washington, right? We have that mural that's in the Capitol. What is it? It's George Washington learning all the secrets of creation, basically, to transform him from a man to a god, right? Did we really think that George Washington became a god? In Virginia, they would say yes, right? Because revere George Washington here. We have a monument named after him. But in all seriousness, that was the reason that the Egyptian dynastic period lasted for 3 millennia, right? Because even the lowest slave believed from the bottom of his heart that guy who was king and then later pharaoh, as we get closer to the time of the Greeks, he truly was a god, right? So I'm going to stay in line. That's why, again, you have this 3,000 year long period of Egyptian dynasties that were almost unbroken. And the only times they were broken were from within, right? Like this brother or this uncle got pissed off and killed this dude. And, but the actual rituals themselves were actual apotheosis ceremonies, right? So, but to your point, no, the Egyptian religion did not deify people when they died, right? And going off on a tangent, when someone died, what did they have to do? They had to travel with, right, Anubis, right, and travel to the underworld and prove their worth to get into the underworld, right? You had the scales, and on one side you had the feather of Ma'at, which we talked about, right? which was the symbol of order and balance and everything right in the world. And then they would put your heart on the scale. And if your heart was heavier than the feather, you went off into the abyss. But if your heart was lighter than the feather, meaning that you lived a life according to Mott, you got to hang out in the underworld and eat ambrosia and do all the cool things. But yeah, they weren't deified. They just got to take their place in the underworld.
Part of me was just really liking that idea of, that spark of godhood in every man, that kind of thing, which you see in much later religions, that as opposed to the divine, not denigrating, but coming down to us, that as humanity, we are able to elevate ourselves up to deity. But again, that's later religions. And
to your point, no, it's a fantastic question. And it definitely gets the juices flowing, because looking at it historically, right? When do we start to see instances of divinity within man? You don't see that until the rise of the Semitic period, right? So it's the Semitic religions, one of which is what?
Judaism.
The Jewish religion, where you actually start to see that man is created for a purpose in the image and the likeness of God, right? So to the Egyptian creation stories, what was man? Man was the tears that flew into the dirt and sprouted up and became people, right? So man and God were not on a kind of a similar plane, right? So when Atum cried and his eyeball juices hit the Ben, which was the mound of creation, right? That's how man was created, but he wasn't given a immortal soul, and he wasn't given a going back to Genesis, the image and the likeness of God, right? That really transcends what all of the pre-Judeo-Christian religions really believed, right? And if you go back even further to the time of Babylon and Sumer and things like that, man was a plaything, right? Man was created to be slave, to be chattel, to be abused and scoffed at and used as labor and stuff like that. So really big difference in the way that those religious systems viewed man and their relationship to deity.
Joe, you can say the same thing about the Greek mythos and the Norse mythos. It's like, here are the gods. They're incredibly powerful. They're petty and they have all the human emotions and all this, but they're up here. And then all the people are just down there. They're playthings, Thor can go down and sleep with all the human women, but there is that division. They're on this plane. We're down here.
There is, but you picked exactly right. So a lot of the, in my opinion, a lot of the religious systems, including the Greeks and the Romans, which were basically stolen Greeks, right? And then the Norse is a fantastic example. You have deity that expresses overtly human characteristics, right? They're petty, they're crappy people, they rape, they pillage, they do the worst things that humanity does, but it's okay because they're gods. But they live and roam with man, right? So, the Norse believed, there's many stories, the Norse would believe, like, if they were having a battle and Thor came down and whooped your opponent's butt, he walked and lived among them, you know what I mean? So it was this, there's no separation between the mundane and the sacred, right? To your point, they were, the Norse and the Greeks are perfect examples. Zeus was a hot mess of a person, right? Lots of awful stories about him and his illegitimate children and stuff. Odin was the same way, right? Super petty dude. But again, they display these traits of humanity and justify it by saying, well, they're gods, so they're allowed to do that stuff.
Right. I didn't want to say something. Kurt, do you have something?
Oh, I was just wondering, these are really elaborate stories, that were created. Were they created strictly to try to control the people that were there and come up with this thing? Or were they really trying to hide some truth that, an allegory, if you will, that was supposed to help elevate people?
That's a great question. So, and I probably don't have enough time to give you my entire answer, but looking at it from and that's a conversation talking about religion in a sense, right? So to keep it as mundane as possible, my answer, and not get in trouble. Let's look at the original versions of the Bible, right? So and I say this to people, and I'm a religious student in training myself, or a biblical student in training. Let's look at the Bible. People look at it from a very surface level as one book, right? It's got a first page, it's got a last page, and stuff in between. that is not how those stories existed for over 2,500 years, right? You had the Pentateuch, which was, again, 5 different books, but they didn't exist in one combined, nice, pretty bound thing until centuries later, right? So you had the stories of creation, you had the stories of the patriarchs, you had the stories of the genealogies, you had the stories of people's travels into Egypt and things like that. So these were all concise stories that for thousands of years were oral. And it wasn't until much, much later where they were written down and then combined into a cohesive narrative, right? So let's look at the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, depending on your flavor. That wasn't combined until the form that it was in until the Babylonian captivity. Before that time, those books of the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible did not live from a page 1 to at the end with bound volumes, right? So they were all these different stories that were meant to convey different meanings at different times. Right? The creation narrative in Genesis was told at a certain time or was told for a specific reason to talk about how God created the world and our place in it, right? As images of deity, right? And this is one of the earliest stories where this actually happens, which separates Judeo-Christians from all the other peoples in that area, right? But you take that a step further and you talk about, God choosing a certain people and the reasons behind the choosing, right? So that's where we start to leave Genesis, get into Exodus, and then we get into Numbers, and we start to talk about God's journey with these people. So all of the different stories within all religious systems of the past, especially those found in the ancient Near East, had different purposes, but they were bound much, much later. So, if you and I lived 3,500 years ago, we didn't have a Tanakh or an Old Testament to read in order, right? We would sit there around the campfire and listen to stories because you and I couldn't read, Kurt. The only people who could read were the priests and the scribes. So, but we got to sit there and listen to stories, and they were stories based upon our understanding of our worldview. You know what I mean? That's why I never get into discussions about, a lot of the discussions you have in religion today about this and that and how to understand it and how to translate it. We don't have the same worldview as people in the ancient Near East 4,000 years ago. And you know what? There's no amount of reading that's ever going to give you that because they're so inherent to the way we were raised and who we are as a people. So I hope I answered your question, but if I didn't, we could talk after.
Kurt, if I could just interject, I think every religion does try to explain things. Man, before we developed the sciences to really understand nature around us, man asked the question, why is there lightning in the sky? Why does rain fall? So they have to invent a story to explain what they see in nature. Well, the sky's up here, the earth is down here because they were separated. We come up with a mythology to explain what we see in nature because we don't have the science to understand it. So that's to appease the people. Why is there lightning? Oh, the gods are angry. So that's part of it. Science comes along and explains how the world, we kind of move away from the myths and more into science. And we say, well, lightning is caused by a difference in electrical energy between this place and this place. And so I think it was at one point to explain what we're seeing. I don't know that it was necessary to control the people as much. Maybe some of it. I've heard that it wasn't until the Judaic religion that we actually had morality woven into our religion where it's not just the story of the gods, but it's here's how you're supposed to live your life because God wants you to act differently.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Joe.
So yeah, a couple of things that you said, Chris. So so let's talk about the term. The term invent stories makes me feel sad inside, right? Because to them, they were not inventions, right? So exactly to your point, as we as modern people understand that lightning is a difference in polarity and, electricity wants to find a grounding state, so it comes and hits the ground or your dog or whatever is closest to the ground. That was their understanding of their worldview, right? Because they didn't have the understanding, they didn't have the technology, they didn't have the terminology to explain things. That was a pure and a valid understanding for them, right? It was just as valid as, why does the sun come up every day? Why does that work for us? Because we understand it, because we can see it with our eyeball, right? We moved from a inductive way of being, right, where we had these innate truths that were inside of us, to a deductive way of being, like, well, that's not good enough for me. I want to find out the answer. I want to go look. And that's where you had people like Newton and Galileo and start to stick their eyeballs out and be like, well, let me see what I can see in nature, and start to wrap some order around it, right? That's, for me, that's what, I'm a super uber nerd amateur scientist, but that's for me is science. For me is always the understanding of the how, but that never has to conflict with the why, right? Science will never tell us why. Why was I created? Why was the earth formed? Why did gas, using gravity, congeal and form our sun and all of our planets? It's never going to tell me the why, but my faith does, so I think they're just two different questions that need to be answered by two different sets of rules that govern us as human beings.
Right. I think Chad had a question. Sorry.
It was more of a comment, and it was just kind of echoing what Joe was saying. Is, that, for all of us, I think just being human is kind of figuring out how the world works and, our place in it, what the rules are and what the roles are, for lack of a better word, and I think back then, that was an answer, and nowadays I think many of us are looking for our own answer, or whatever that answer is. So,
well, to your point, who was it? Kurt, that talked about control. I mean,
Right.
let's look at that. You're absolutely right. There were societies that absolutely used a theocratic view to rule their societies.
Yes,
and we could absolutely include Egypt in that, right? Nobody
to keep this leader in charge. Well, God put him here, so you can't go against the leader.
That's absolutely right. But I mean, we have examples of that 3,000 years later. I mean, look at the Romanization of Christianity, right? Christianity, where was it done? I talk about this in service all the time. Where was Christianity done during the first century? It was done in people's houses. You got together with fellow believers, parts of your family and people in your community, and you got together and you did Christianity in your home, right? Church was at home. And it wasn't until the Romanization of the church where we started to get all these rules and like, oh, you have to do this or you're going to go to hell, or you're going to have to do this and you're going to go to hell. And then finally, it wasn't until the 1500s where you had Martin Luther. It was like, you guys are all full of crap. So, and here's why, and that's where we started to have a breakdown of that. But, those are two big examples of religion used as a control set to, place your future judgment on your actions today.
Let me just ask you a question then, just to bring this to a conclusion then. For the Egyptians, was the Egyptian religion used to tell the people how to behave, or to just simply explain, here's why this guy's Pharaoh, here's how the universe was created? Were there any moral rules, say?
Absolutely. You had the concept of Ma'at, right? And this was something that was ingrained in you from the time of your birth, right? You had this concept of Ma'at, which was keep everything in balance and keep everything in harmony, including your interactions with people, the way you conducted yourselves, whether you were honest or not. Because, again, these people truly believed, and again, it's hard for our modern minds for some of us to understand this, they truly believed that their actions would be weighed in the afterlife. You know what I mean? It's like, if I'm a crappy person, I'm going to go into the abyss and I'm going to cease to exist. If I'm a good person and I do the things I'm supposed to do based on the concept of Ma'at, that permeated everything, like storekeepers were honest for the most part, if they believed in the concept of Ma'at and wouldn't cheat people, things like that. So it permeated everything. So they were, to Kurt's point, they were fearful of their time coming to the afterlife. Well, was I a good enough person that my heart is going to be lighter than the balance? And if the answer was no, I'm screwed. So, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. One thing I wanted to get to, when you talked about the creation, I love the creation stories. Every religion has a creation story. When they talked about there was this vast primordial sea. So all there was a vast ocean. There was no land. There was no bottom. It was just a vast and then the gods created the cosmic egg, and then out of that came Ra, and after that came, I guess, the earth and everything else. So it's interesting that you compare that to the Jewish and Christian view of Genesis.
I didn't flat out say that, but I like your inference. Yes.
Well, but it's basically there was a void, and then there was the earth and the sun and everything else. Now, take it from the point of view of someone living in Egypt where they believe the earth was flat. They couldn't tell the earth was round. There's like the sun orbits the earth. It's very obvious. The earth is this big flat surface and we're on it. The concept of an ocean is something that everyone can relate to. Okay, at one time there was only this vast ocean and nothing in it. And then we had the sun and the earth, and I guess the ocean went away, whatever. But that you can relate to. It's not, I mean, to me, I'm like, well, there's no way that the universe can be a big ocean and then the sun was formed. That makes no sense given our modern understanding of astronomy. But the idea that there's a void and there's basically nothing, and here's a star and here's the earth and everything, and they formed, that you can actually say, okay, it makes sense. There wasn't anything, and suddenly there's the earth and there's the sun. And then you can actually, that doesn't necessarily contradict what we know about the universe in that, okay, there was the Big Bang and there were all of these stars and ours is just one of them and on and on and on. So it's not totally contradictory. I found it interesting to me to hear the idea of here's a big ocean and that's all there is and there's nothing really in it. There's no fish in it. It's just a big, vast sea. And you just suppose that to here's a void and there's nothing and suddenly there's something.
I'm going to say something to you.
Okay.
You've heard it many times before, but I want you to think about it in the context of this.
Mhm.
You've heard this. I know you have. You've heard this many, many times. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness rested upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. I'm going to stop there. Okay, so that's the first words of Genesis, right?
Right.
What do we have? Formless void, waters. Do we have an earth? Do we have a sky? Do we have planets? Do we have moons? No, we have a formless void, which essentially sounds like water, right? So exactly to your point, Chris, they did not have the concept of a Big Bang universe, like we do today, right? It was not understanding. Everything in all of the creation narratives, to include Genesis, unfortunately, right? Or fortunately, talked about void or chaos, right? So there was something there, but it was nothing, right? It was swirling and it was formless. It had no depth. So, the scribes who penned down the inspired words of Genesis did not believe that we had creation ex nihilo, right? Something out of nothing, like we do with the Big Bang, right? We have the singularity and it contained everything that's ever going to be in the universe and it exploded out. That's what we believe today, or most scientists believe today. The early Jews who told the stories of Genesis to their descendants and stuff did not believe that. They believed in a formless void. So there was something, it just had no order and no harmony and no shape and no size and no color and no light. But out of that, what did God say? Let there be light. And then that started to create the universe. So it's a lot more similar to a lot of the earlier creation stories that we see in Babylon and Egypt.
I hear what you're saying. Okay.
Than our interpretation of creation today.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I'm sure we could have a whole nother episode just about creationism. Maybe we will.
No, I don't want to be on that panel of creation.
Okay.
I ain't talking about that.
Okay. Any other questions from anyone? I really think this is really interesting. And I love the connection. We didn't really talk about the connections to Masonry, but they're there and they're kind of hard to dispute. The similarities are clearly there.
And let me be, because I know people are gonna, trash me on Facebook and stuff like that. In none of this presentation did I ever say descended from the Egyptian mysteries.
What?
Nowhere in that talk did I say that.
You cut out. Say that again.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, repeat yourself.
Okay. So just be on the record. Nowhere in this presentation did I say that our craft ritual directly comes from the rituals of ancient Egypt. There is no direct correlation.
Was it Pike or Mackey who?
Pike and Mackey, they both said that, and it's it's a romantic view of things. Now, I'll always say, and Chad's heard me say this about 10 times already. Are we a direct descendant to some of those older mystery schools? No, we're not. Are we a spiritual descendant of them? Do we pick up a lot of the same allegories and stories and usages and purpose? 1,000% yes.
Yep.
So, but yes, Joe did not say Freemasonry.
Well, that is an argument I hear online that we stole it, literally stole it.
Who did we steal it from? They were all dead.
Here's the thing about, and just to make a point about when people say stealing, it's one thing to say you stole. It's kind of like if I get a pirate copy of a movie. If I videotape a movie that's, if I get a pirate copy of a movie, I haven't stolen it. You still have your copy of the movie. I just have my own copy. I just simply didn't pay you for it. So in a sense, I didn't steal it because you still have it. Stole in the literal sense is you have a movie and I steal it from you and you no longer have it. And now I have it. The people who make the arguments about us stealing masonry from the Egyptians literally claim that we stole it. They don't have it anymore. We stole it. I don't see how in that sense you could say the first argument, which is we stole your idea and we made our own copy, but you still have your idea. We didn't remove it from you. It's literally put to me as if we stole it. We had this once, it's gone, you have it now. Well, how did we take it? How is it gone? I copied your idea. If we did, which I can't say we did or not, if I stole your idea, it's the second definition. You literally still have it. I can't take it out of your brain. But they talk about it as if we did. And it's kind of weird.
It's even worse, right? So to say that we stole our ideas from masonry from Egypt are kind of ludicrous because everybody who practiced all of those had been dead for 1,500 years. So there's nobody to steal it from. We just learned how to read. And yes, a tactical acquisition. I like that, Andrew.
Yes.
Yeah, no, there was nobody to steal from. But like I said, the purposes of it, right? The priest making in Egypt, the rites of Eleusis, which I just talked about on TMR the other night. God, I love that place. To all of the secret societies that started to form after the Romanization of Europe, they all had the same underlying purpose, right? And I think we do have that purpose, even if we're not directly connected to them, and that's okay. It's not a bad thing.
If it's a question of giving credit, if you're in the Scottish Rite and if you read anything that Pike wrote, especially, he says flat out, hey, we in the modern era took this from the Sumerians. We took this from the Osirians. We took this from the Zoroastrians. We took this from the Greeks. We took this from the Egyptians. They all had similar ideas. We took them. We're inspired by this. We took the symbolism and we've adopted it, especially in the Scottish Rite and to a point in Masonry, in Craft Masonry, but especially in the Scottish Rite. We blatantly say all of this symbolism in the 32nd degree came from Zoroastrianism. I wrote a paper on Zoroaster because it's an interesting person, interesting
Very much
religion.
so, yeah.
And I learned a lot writing about that and all the symbolism of the 32nd degree. It's like, we say flat out, the Vedics did this. These guys did this. We've borrowed their ideas because every human civilization has similar ideas. We've tried to distill them down to where anyone can relate to them, but the ideas repeat again and again and again. To say that the Egyptians were the only one to have the idea of priests and ritual is ridiculous. Everybody does. Masonry borrows from all of these earlier sources of man's wisdom. If you believe one strain of Masonry, we preserve intellectual knowledge that might otherwise be lost, but we kind of kept it secret and kept it to keep it alive to pass on to another generation because it was getting wiped out. The Library of Alexandria behind me here, it all gets wiped out. So Masonry, according to some, is this ongoing strain of intellect and reasoning and architecture and science that has been lost throughout the centuries, but we've kept it alive all this time.
I would
a romantic view, but if that's the case, then we're owning up to it. We took this from other people, but we're giving full credit to where we got it from. So I don't think we stole anything.
I think that's a very good explanation of Freemasonry.
Well, isn't that kind of the whole point of Joseph Campbell's work, is that there's only so many ways to express the human experience. Like there's only so many ways we can talk about that, right? And so the reason that we see similarities is because
we're human.
Like I said before, we're all trying to figure out the way the world works and how we fit into it.
Well,
and there's only so many ways you can talk about that.
We're supposed to be decent to each other. How many other ways are you going to say that? You can distill that, do good unto others. We're supposed to be nice to each other. Be excellent to each other.
There's a guy named Josh Beasley in Ohio who does a phenomenal presentation about that, where he takes that whole idea of the golden rule and traces it through so many different allegories and theologies and mysteries. He does a really great presentation on that.
Do I got to write a book now, Joe? The hero's journey.
No, there's already one written by Joseph Campbell. It's,
Oh, okay.
it's pretty good.
But I've just summarized it shorter. Okay, I
did,
saved
yeah.
y'all saving the book. I'm reading the book. All right, very good. Any other questions? Anything else? We definitely had a lot. I love the back and forth. I want to see this in every single discussion. But Joe, you give us a lot to think about, and I'm sure people are going to sign off and think, "Oh, I wanted to ask that."
Well, I'm always. You guys know me. I'm always around. You wanna pick
Absolutely.
my brain? Facebook me, call me.
Let me say this. I do appreciate, Joe, you coming on here. It's been over a year since I've been trying to get you here. I got you to come in person, and I paid you back by not showing up. So that's on me.
No worries. That was
Hey,
a blast. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me in person.
I appreciate
That
it.
was a really fun day.
I did. I think I apologized to you before, but I mean, when a good friend of mine passed away and his funeral service was that same day, it's like
Oh my God.
it was yeah. So I had to. It was Jack Pallet who had passed away.
Oh wait, someone in the chat was asking about Masonicon South.
Yes.
Putting the links in now.
Yes. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, there's
But
the website, and here's where you.
I did want to tell you in person. I'm sorry I missed it when you came. I twisted your arm to get you to come and give a talk, and unfortunately, Jack Pallet's funeral service was the same day.
Yeah, no worries.
And I obviously had to go to that. But I'm glad I was able to get you on here. We'll bring you back again.
Happy to whenever.
And I want to thank everyone for coming out. We had 20 people at our high water mark, and I thank everybody for sticking around. About 7 of you have peeled off, but that's okay. I do not have a speaker lined up for the 24th, but we do plan to have our next Zoom on September 24th, and it'll be announced on the group and all that. I'm trying to line someone up, and I can only get people for October and November. I can't find someone yet for the 24th. So we may or may not have one. I normally like to announce the next one and have it lined up, but here's where we are. But I appreciate everyone coming out. If you're watching us on YouTube, please like and subscribe. You help us keep going. If anyone is not already a member of our group, please join. And if you our Facebook group, and if you're not already getting our papers, then email me, and I'll be happy to add you to the list. I love doing the research papers. I managed to do it every single week. I've done it every single week for over 2 years straight. I have not missed a week. It's been a Thursday instead of a Monday sometimes, but I've not missed sending one every week. And as long as I can still get some, I'll continue to put those out there. But there's a lot of good papers out there. So it's been a labor of love, and I still keep doing it as long as I can do it. Unfortunately, I'm the only one doing it half the time for these meetings and whatever. It's just me making them happen. So I'm sorry when I can't.
That's on par for Masonry, so
Yeah, I know, but I feel like this is my show, but I owe it to the Research Lodge. It's in their name that I'm doing it. So as long as I don't embarrass them too much, they'll let me keep doing it, because no one else wants to step up and do it. That's kind of how we are. So thank you all for coming out. Again, Brian, thank you for being my lovely co-host as always.
You are lovely, Brian.
My Vanna White, my Ed McMahon.
Thank you.
Whatever yours.
I think.
All righty. And okay, thanks everybody. Anybody have any final words before we close out?
Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks again, Joe.
Yeah, anytime, brother. You know that.
All right. Everybody, you all have a wonderful day.